Okay, wait Who's my timer now?
Me.
Okay. 1, 2, go.
Now when we talk about the pillars of Singapore, who pops into your mind? Lee Hsien Loong, Lee Kuan Yew, or perhaps Goh Chok Tong? Now these are no doubt great men who have contributed a lot to Singapore's social and economic development, allowing it to prosper to what it has become today. However, without the help and dedication of our early political leaders, we would not have come to enjoy such a stable and comfortable lifestyle that most of us take for granted. So today, I will hope for everybody to join me in commemorating one of the forgotten heroes of Singapore, our first elected president, and a man who was bestowed the title of the People's President, our late President, Mr. Ong Teng Cheong. Now, Mr. Ong is the father to great ideas and concepts that presented Singapore with its unique identity. Our ever-so-efficient SMRT, our orchid motif national dress, and of course, our durian-shaped esplanade. Now, all these identities that we grew to love and to cherish would all be nothing without Mr. Ong's significant contribution to the communication industry as well as his undying passion for the arts. However, we come together today not only to celebrate his wonderful achievements, but rather his personal attributes of selflessness, his willingness to stand up for what was right, and finally, his strong loyalty to our country and its people. Now, I remember the time when I was just 7 years old, back in my primary school days when most of us had a time of leisure. Now, I managed to catch a glimpse of a telecasted charity event known as the President Star Charity. It was actually one of the most memorable scenes as my parents and I teared while we watched the late Madam Ling Xiu Mei cry when her husband Mr. Ong played her a dedicated piece known as 月亮代表我的心, which also translates to how the moonlight represents my love for you on the piano to her. It was later on that I found out that the President Star Charity is yet another legacy of Mr. Ong, and how the couple graced many charity events and functions despite being in poor health, just so as to raise funds for the less fortunate in Singapore. It was also reported that that pioneer charity event even managed to raise a startling amount of $600,000, a considerable amount of money back in those days. Thus, through Mr. Ong's act of love, not only to his wife, but also to the people of Singapore, made me learn the honourable virtue of selflessness. Now, apart from his acts of altruism, Mr. Ong is also a man of great courage and righteousness. Now, for the most of us, we have learned growing up through the exposure to social media that economic strikes are always labelled as a notion of disturbance to peace. However, it was actually surprising to find out that in 1986, as his capacity as Deputy Prime Minister at that time, Mr. Ong actually sanctioned a strike for shipyard workers to protest their mistreatment by upper management. Now, even when the PAP opposed in fear of investment backlash, Mr. Ong stuck to his intuition. Now, eventually, it did turn out that Mr. Ong was right, and the 2 days long strike managed to resolve the majority of the issues faced by the shipyard workers. His sole act of standing up for what was right, rather than advocating what majority thinks is wrong, demonstrated his evident capabilities as a leader, one with great honesty and integrity. Now, finally, but not the least, is the loyalty that Mr. Ong gave to our country and also to the most of Singaporeans. As his eminent role as a president, part of his dire responsibility was to help safeguard the monetary reserves belonging to Singapore, as contributed by our parents and soon to be us in the future. In a nutshell, one of the roles of the President of Singapore is to prevent the misusage of funds and corruption that might occur if the monetary reserves accumulated from the previous government is passed on to the next elected government without proper restraint. Now, unlike the previous presidential candidates before Mr. Ong, they did not seek to question the government on their exact monetary transactions when they were in office. However, Mr. Ong is the first presidential candidate who demonstrated strong loyalty to the people of Singapore when he took up the courage to demand a monetary report from the government, all with the notion of checking on the transparency of the government's expenditure of the money contributed by the citizens of our country. Now, even though this caused a certain political uproar amongst parliament members, nor did he once back down when faced with immense pressure. His strong desire to prove himself to the people of Singapore touched many through his utmost loyalty to the country and its people, and thus also earning him the unofficial title of the People's President. But it has been more than a decade ever since Mr. Ong delivered his pre-election speech with the following statement. My loyalty is first and foremost to the people of Singapore. It has always been so and will always remain so. Now looking back in time, it can be said and proven that Mr. Ong is certainly not a man of empty promises. His selfless nature, coupled with commendable courage, integrity and loyalty to us fellow Singaporeans, would of course deserve nothing less than our total recognition and appreciation. Now, while Singapore will no doubt require more men and women of Mr. Ong's caliber, I know that deep inside the hearts of many Singaporeans, he is irreplaceable. Mr. Ong is a man who continued to serve us after being diagnosed with lymphatic cancer in 1992. Mr. Ong is a man who chose to stand up for the best interests of his people in times of need. Mr. Ong was a selfless man who demonstrated great sympathy and immense empathy. Mr. Ong was our president, our friend, and most of all, a Singaporean who deserves, no question, our greatest respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey Jeremy, I caught at least 3 instances of your eyes.
I'm sorry.